I just wanted to take a moment and personally thank all of you for being a part of this journey with us. Whether you've joined through the YouTube membership program or you're a part of the Broken Science Medical Society, your support means the world to me and to our team and everybody who's worked so hard on this. This show is about challenging the status quo and questioning narratives that don't add up and diving deep into conversations that truly matter. So I'm thrilled to announce that the full episodes are coming out, and the first one is available this week. And our first guest is none other than the legendary Adam Carolla. He and I had an incredible discussion that I hope you all really enjoy. I know I did. And the best part is that this is just the beginning. The season features 8 powerful episodes with new ones coming out every Wednesday. And we'll be diving into lots of provocative topics with guests like Dr. Drew, who will unpack the flaws in modern medicine and media, and people like Pashtana Durrani, who shares her courageous fight to educate girls in Afghanistan. Each episode is designed to push the boundaries and explore ideas that many are too afraid to touch. This project took a bit of a backseat to all the other work that we've been producing at BSI. And it was on the advice of Dr. Drew that I kind of pivoted and changed my plan from shooting in person to shooting remotely, just to make life a little easier. So you'll notice that sometimes I'm here in my office and sometimes I'm in a studio or in a house. And I hope that that doesn't distract too much. But I really hope you guys enjoy the show that we've worked really hard to create. And if you do, please subscribe, share with your friends. The more people who know about all of the projects that we're doing at the Broken Science Initiative, the bigger that the impact is that we will have together as a community. So thanks again for all your support, and I can't wait to hear what you think. Also, please feel free to recommend guests. We're going to do more of these. There'll be another season, who knows when exactly, but when we have time, we've all enjoyed this. So recommend people if there's anybody that you find to meet these qualifications or criteria. Thank you for doing this. I feel like you're going to be the first episode of this new show, which partly is, really exciting since you sort of launched podcasting. I feel like it's kind of cool to have you be the godfather of podcasting, be my first episode. But this show is really about critical thinking. So I'm going to talk to scientists and researchers and artists and musicians and comedians, people who have really challenged the status quo in some way and realize that, in a lot of cases, it's not a choice. It's sort of innate. Maybe you were born that way. And try to understand why we've lost this ability to challenge authority and hopefully inspire people to sort of speak up when they see something wrong or they don't understand. We have all this pretense about wanting to talk about difficult things. But then when anybody talks about difficult things and has an opposing view, they face all kinds of, fear and emotional retribution. So I feel like, just to start, I'd be curious, do you remember the first time that you challenged authority? Were you a kid? Was there any sort of instance where you realized, I can't keep my mouth shut about this?
I guess I always had a kind of a rebellious streak. It kind of comes and it goes. I was kind of rebellious as a kid. And then I kind of buttoned it up for a while and sort of got through high school. And then I had a lot of jobs. My early life was pretty humbling. So it's kind of easy to be rebellious, I guess, at the ends of our society. So if you're sort of quasi-homeless and strung out on something and kind of a punk rocker, then you can kind of rage and do what you want. And if you're at the sort of top of the food chain, then maybe you're Elon Musk, then you kind of say what you want and challenge people and be provocateur and stuff like that. But for the people that are sort of the lower end of the middle, you're making $7 an hour driving a pickup truck, doing manual labor the whole day. You don't have any money. Nobody wants to hear what you have to say. There's not, great platform for you to say what you have to say. I wasn't much of a reader or writer. There was no Twitter. So I just sort of kept my head down and went to work. And I kind of realized that, if you rebel on a construction site, you get fired. So I didn't want to get fired. So I just did what the man said to do, and I just went to work, and I just kind of kept it zipped for, you know, quite a long period of time.
I mean, I think there's something interesting about that too. Like in some ways, I think I suffer from this condition, right? And it's like, I don't think it's a choice, but I also think it's got to be some sort of like genetic defect, because if you think about it in like an evolutionary sense, it's not in your interest, right? I mean, you might think it's in the interest of all people to speak up and say something's wrong, or to counter some authoritarian view that's harming people or you think is not the wrong path. But ultimately, you're far more likely to be successful if you just go along, right? And so you find...
Well, I mean, I think you are, depending on how good you are at rebelling, speaking out, you know, assembling words, articulating yourself, there's a reward at the very top. You know, if you're, you know, I think it would be in a way like athletics, you know, like I worked really hard at football. I was pretty good at football, but I never made any money at it. And then you end up just getting kind of beat up a little and putting in a lot of work. And so if you're really good at football, then you do get rewarded. But to keep the analogy going, just to be kind of a fair to middling, you know, college player, and no, you don't get rewarded. And so if you're really good at speaking up and speaking out, then I think there's a way to get paid. But generally, for the lion's share of the people who are voicing counter and thus kind of unpopular opinions, then you will just get smacked down.
It's interesting. I feel like one of the things that I respect and like about the way that you sometimes approach these issues is things like trying to encourage people with the, you know, kind of N=1 civil disobedience, right? The like turn left stuff, right? Like just do it. Or if we all said we weren't going to wear masks, right? Like there would be no hope. But you're obviously very fragile until there's a critical mass of people who are doing that, and it actually promotes the change. So I think one of the things that I'm really interested in is this idea of, you know, who are the people who speak up? So even as a football player, right? Like you have some power in high school in that social circle where you're on the football team and you're a cool kid or whatever. That power maybe should liberate you more to say what you think or, you know, not go along. And I worry that's not happening as much now as it happened, you know, when we were younger. And, you know, part of that I think became really clear through COVID. And you had that funny bit where you said it was like crate training. And I thought that was brilliant. It is. It's like this notion of like, we're going to indoctrinate you into this way of doing things just because. And then when you get older, you're going to have a, you know, much more passive mindset about what your role in this is.
Yeah, the bit, I mean, it's not even a bit. I don't even do it in my stand-up, but I was saying in all earnestness, you're crate training these kids, and you got to crate train dogs when they're puppies. You can't get them middle-aged. It doesn't really work to crate train. So I was like, why the emphasis on the kids? Why are they going so hard? You know, if you really just sort of think about it, COVID statistically didn't affect kids at all. Mm-hmm. So, and there's a lot of people saying, well, they didn't know. It's like they knew. Mm-hmm. And if they didn't know, they could have found out. It became abundantly clear early that kids were not dropping dead from COVID. And it became abundantly clear that the elderly were dropping dead of COVID. But the elderly doesn't scare the moms. Kids scare the moms, and you have to get to the moms. And you get to the moms the same way you get to them to buy laundry detergent. Like the dads aren't buying laundry detergent. You got to get to the moms, and the moms will, even if they're spending dad's money, they're still the ones who are buying all the stuff and bringing it into the house. So if you're Procter and Gamble, you want the moms weaponized buying whatever.
Yeah, and you know, there were actually documents that showed that they were going after moms, like through media stuff.
Oh, there were?
Yeah, I helped Naomi Wolf was a client of mine when she got kicked off of Twitter.
Interesting. So here's the thing about me. I knew it. I didn't need to see
you could
documents.
See it. And actually, it was incredibly sexist bullshit the way they did it, where they I mean, it's a government document being sent to media organizations, and it outlines you need to target women, and you need to target them with emotional appeal, because they can't understand data.
Right.
It's like,
Yeah.
well, that's fantastic. Thank you for that.
Daddy'll do data. Thank you.
But I mean, and it worked, right? It works. And so then
it worked. It worked perfectly. On people that do have issues processing data, and people who are scared, and people who want to be a good mom and a safe mom and get along, and so on and so forth. So it's a vulnerable group, and they preyed on a vulnerable group. Now, it didn't affect kids, and I would hear numbers of like how many kids died, healthy kids died of COVID. And for a while, they're like, I don't know, 9, 12. Now they're kind of at 0. So this never was a thing for kids.
it was less than like 0.01%.
Yeah.
It was
Well, of healthy kids dying
All
of COVID,
kids.
they don't even know.
right.
But whatever, it's bullshit.
Right.
They lied. And they scared the moms and they scared the kids. And they started going in on kids. You had to fly in an airplane. You couldn't, anyone over 2 years of age, 2 years and above, had to wear a mask on a plane. I mean, masks don't work. It's unthinkable. By the way, 2-year-old wearing a mask with around their neck, eating pudding.
My workaround for that, we flew with the kids from Florida to Boston, and I got them giant lollipops because you were allowed to eat, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, just lick it every
Yeah.
now and then. You don't have to wear your mask, right? It was
Yeah.
so stupid.
So it was non-scientific. It was a lie. And they were clearly trying to manipulate people, especially moms, get to the kids, scare the moms with the kids. And then you have the whole house. And the dad's not really going to be able to dictate COVID protocol inside the house. The mom, on behalf of the kids, shall dictate that protocol. So that's what happened. So I knew it was happening super early on. And as far as crate training goes, yeah, you got to get them when they're puppies, get them in the crate. Now, the crate doesn't offer any protection. If the house is on fire, the crate trained dog will go into the crate, shut the door, and lock himself in the crate. Now the dog's in a crate in the living room, and the fucking house is going to burn down. But the dog feels more secure. And the crate, it's the same as the mask. It doesn't do anything, but it gives some illusion of protection or security or something. So I knew this was happening from Jump Street. Really, 8 days in, I was like, what's going on? And I only knew it because I was a pattern follower, and I listened to talk radio a lot. And I was listening to them talk about, somebody died in West Covina of COVID, and then another woman died in Pasadena of COVID. And I was like, where are the ages? And they didn't give the ages. And I was like, I always get the ages, because from a pattern standpoint, it was always a 61-year-old man from Arcadia died in a motorcycle accident, and a 52-year-old woman died at Ralph's supermarket when she had a heart attack. And I was like, all of a sudden, it's minus the age. And I was like, I think it's minus the age because these are a bunch of 90-year-olds who are dying, and that doesn't scare people. So we just said a person died, and we didn't assign an age to
Which
them.
is the same thing you see with crime, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like, if it's a white male, we hear it's a white male, and if it's not, we don't.
Yeah, it's just a
right?
person. Or,
You infer it's not a white male
if you're
because
protesting against Palestine and Hamas, the 59-year-old Jewish man was died when he fell down.
right, not murdered.
Right, not hit in the head.
Right.
Fell to the ground. Yes,
Right.
this is what the news does. I was aware of it. So I was like, I'm not getting any numbers. This is an age thing, and I'm not buying it. And it was always an age thing, and that information was guarded pretty tightly by the news organizations, CDC, WHO. They didn't want us to find out. That didn't affect kids. And it was an election year, and they wanted to get their people in power, and so the best way to do it was to sort of shut down society. So I was aware of it, and I spoke out about it as frequently as I could.
Did you give any thought to that? Like, is there any strategy that goes into like, I'm going to say this shit, it's going to have backlash, I'm going to do it at these times or this way? No, it just, is it like completely impulsive essentially?
Well, it's not impulsive. It's I've examined the data. Mm-hmm. I know what's going on, and now I'm going to speak out.
But like your tweet, for instance, I know you've said that you got a lot of phone calls from people being like, you got to take that down. You probably knew you were going to get those phone calls.
I wasn't surprised by it, but I wasn't not surprised by it, or I don't factor those elements into a tweet. The tweet said, this thing's killing old people and sick people, and the rest of you pussies got played. 100% accurate. And by the way, and who's getting played next time? Mm-hmm. Next time they make something up, are you guys going to act this way like cowards? And so I just sent it out because that's what was happening. It, went viral and people got upset. And it was Judd Apatow who called me because he's a friend. And he said, you got to take the tweet down, And I was like, no. I mean, unless if it's wrong, right, I would do it, but not if it's right. And then it's like, well, everyone hates you. And I'm like, well, so be it. I don't know. So what's the plan then? I lie so people like me? Those are the new rules? I remain silent so I can be popular or get a job or something, or not upset dumb people or hysterics? I didn't sign up for that. I was a carpenter. I told everyone I'll go back to swinging a hammer, but I didn't get into comedy to zip it and figure out which way the wind was blowing.
Were you surprised that, was any part of that surprising to you, that you didn't have more friends that were saying the same things?
I was a little disappointed by comedians in general, because I was like, you guys are always talking about the truth and about speaking truth to power and standing up and saying unpopular things, and you're always glorifying those who did it in the past. You love Rosa Parks because she was told, here are the rules, and she defied the rules, and she's your hero. And you love everyone who defied the rules. Those are your heroes. Now, you guys have turned into sheep, and you're going by every rule. And, in California, I kept telling everybody, Trump's the president, but he's not the man. Your governor's the man. Mm-hmm. His name is Gavin Newsom, and he's locked your schools down and shut your beaches. So go ahead and push back against the man. But remember, your man is Gavin Newsom. It's not Trump.
Did you feel like privately there was a lot more support than there was publicly? Like people were just too scared to say things? Or do you think that most people actually really bought into it?
Most people I knew bought into it. And it was probably a combination of both, which is, well, why not buy into it? Because if you don't buy into it, could be devastating to your career. So it's expedient from a career-wise standpoint to buy into it. And then it's also, it's a kind of a, do I really believe it, or am I worried about being canceled? And the answer is, it gets super blurry. But I don't want to be canceled so badly that I'll just go along with this and thus believe it. I don't know how much of their fibers act, I don't know if they 80% believed it or 20% believed it. They believed they were going to get shit canned from their job and ostracized and from their, community or what have you, and unpopular on Twitter or whatever. So it's like, did Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson believe it? I don't know. Is it going to say anything? No.
Yeah. Well, for me, it was people like, you see like Rage Against the Machine telling everybody to line up and get the vaccine. And you're like, hold the phone, right? Like, yeah. What has happened to all of you?
I don't know. I don't know how that works.
That's wild.
They're cowards.
Clearly, right?
But, yeah.
And I think the fear of cancel culture is only it's a snowball effect if everybody falls for it, right? And it's a nothing burger if nobody does, right? If everybody were like, fuck it, this is me, right? And my audience likes me for me, and that's why I get paid so much. I fill up stadiums with performances and all these other things. If I start bending to some, arbitrary authority on all this stuff, then I'm no longer me. What am I? I'm just a total sellout, right? I was shocked that there weren't more artists, comedians, musicians, et cetera, that weren't just by their nature standing up to it.
Well, the rebellious part of the artist is an act. That's not really who they are. So, we found out who they really are.
Yeah,
If they were
well,
really rebellious, then we would have known.
But that's what I
during
mean. That's
COVID.
hugely disappointing that we don't
Yeah,
have
but it
more
was an act.
rebellious people who are in these positions of power.
Well, it's like, look, Howard Stern was a rock and roll DJ, dressed in leather, dark shades, whatever. Howard Stern goes to bed at 7 every night. He doesn't drink. He doesn't do drugs. And if you go to dinner with him, and I have, you got to eat dinner at 4 in the afternoon because he's in bed by 7. So is that who he is?
Right.
You know what I mean? Is he the rock and roll guy, or is he this other guy who thinks and acts differently? And so I think a lot of Hollywood show business is just that. Like, we pretend to be this punk group who rages against the machine, but really we're trying to get paid.
Well, and so like going back to like K-Rock stuff, right? I feel like so much of K-Rock was, at least from, an outside, probably naive perspective, there was so much of this sort of counterculture energy, for lack of a better way of saying it. And I don't know that I see that today in any little pockets or places or organizations. I mean, there's people like you that have platforms that are using it to talk about this stuff, but it doesn't feel like there's any kind of like indie movement towards this stuff. Do you agree? And like, is that an accurate articulation of early K-Rock days?
Well, K-Rock was rebelling against norms. And so there's two kinds of rebellion. There's my dad was in the Marines and he wanted my hair short, so I grew it out. You know what I mean? I don't know. Do you like long hair? Do you think it looks good? I don't know, but you're doing the opposite of whatever your dad told you to do. You know what I mean? And that's kind of a typical rebellion. You're just pushing back against.
Just defiant.
You're just defiant, right? For me, I didn't see much sense in that. I was like, well, your hair should be whatever length you like and you think looks good on you, or there's other practical things involved. Like I don't happen to like long hair because it's a hassle, so I have my hair short, but it wouldn't, how my dad wore his hair would be neither here nor there. Then it comes to COVID, and I do push back because I think it's an actual legitimate thing. So I'm not just being counter to whatever, and K-Rock and certain music and certain art was just a counter, Easy Rider, it's like they said to get a job and cut your hair and put a suit on. Well, we're going to do the opposite of that. Now, my thing is sort of like, well, don't just do the opposite. See if maybe it suits you. So there's a kind of a rebellion that's a kind of organic rebellion, and then there's a rebellion where you just do the opposite of whatever.
But like I would say like early Loveline, or like the way you guys took on AIDS, right? And Drew really sort of pushing that forward as a issue that he felt like needed more attention and education and communication. But I think of Loveline a lot as like, it was education, it was comedy, right? It was like all of these things that came together to help inform people in a way that would, demystify something that people were uncomfortable talking about. That's rebellious, but it's rebellious in a useful way, right? It's not just being defiant. It's saying somebody needs to come forward and be defiant in this way so we can save lives, right? So we can answer these questions, and we have a platform to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can get really granular on rebellion. I think Drew just thought there's a message that needs to be pushed out. It's not really getting pushed out, and I thought, yeah, I agree with that. And so we just went to work. I never really thought about who agrees and who disagrees. I was always, whether it was Loveline or whether it was COVID, I was just like, what do I think? Here's what I think. Then here's what I'm going to say.
Still, I would push back on that a little bit, because I feel like the AIDS thing certainly seems like, maybe it wasn't rebellious in design, but it was, the act of doing it was a kind of rebellion from the norm.
Yeah, but it depends how you process rebellion. I don't do a lot of things that society tells me to do. I drive through red turn arrows when the light is green. And the arrow is red. It's not my form of rebellion. It's a waste of my time to sit at an empty intersection. and that arrow wasn't there 5 years earlier, so I'm going to ignore it. Now, I'm not making a statement. I'm just trying to get home 3 minutes earlier, and I've deemed it a waste of my time, and I've also kind of not deputized the government to be in charge of my time, you know, and I've also weighed the risks worth and the benefits and so on and so forth, so I just drive through red arrows. But I'm not making a statement. I find when there's a car behind me witnessing me do it, I'm less comfortable with it. Now, it doesn't stop me from doing it, but if I had my druthers, there'd be nobody watching me do it. Sometimes they honk their horn, or they think I've not seen something, or I'm putting somebody in danger, or something like that. So I drive through red turn arrows. I do it for myself, and I do it because I've deemed these arrows a bad idea, and they are, and I'm not really much interested in how it is processed. It could be processed as me rebelling, but to me, it's completely pragmatic.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to get stuck on the word. I think for me, it's more of like this idea of standing up for something that you see as bullshit or you think is wrong, right? And it's so.
Yeah, I do think it's wrong, and I do think it's bullshit, but I don't look at the arrow any different than I look at AIDS or COVID. It's just, they're wrong. I'm not going along with this, and I'll just say what I want or do what I want.
Do you feel like that's a part, like this sort of like innate idea about who you are? I mean, you're independent enough, right? You could lose sponsors or there could be other ways of sort of threatening your livelihood, but it's not the same as working for some big media company, right? Or industrial platform where like you really are beholden to what they want you to do.
Yeah, you can't work for ESPN and say what I say. You'll immediately be fired.
Is that part of the reason that you've had your own thing for so long?
You know, somebody said to me, you've just been kind of out on your own, doing your own thing for, you know, a long time now. And they said, you must have seen this coming. And I'm very, maybe it's low self-esteem or something, but I'm always quick to like, oh, no, I didn't see anything coming. But I kind of brushed it off, and then I thought about it, and I was like, well, maybe I did see it coming. Maybe there was a part of me that was thinking, you're just not going to fit into this sort of corporate structure with these big conglomerations, and it's just not say what you want to say all the time. Like it's probably just not going to work. So maybe I did sort of see it coming. You know, I like saying what I want to say. I like working in a lot of different genres and mediums, and so I guess I'll just set out to do that. I wouldn't probably flourish in a long-running sitcom or something like that. Probably wouldn't be a good fit for me, and I guess I knew it on some level.
When the radio station turned to the Jack FM and you sort of left to launch your podcast, you know, sort of future, was that a shock to you, or did that cause any sort of upheaval in you thinking like, I thought I had this gig, I was going to do radio forever, and now I've got to reinvent myself or whatever? And I know you've said that it was like a dream to like basically get paid a lot of money after you get laid off to have some time to just like sit around, but you didn't sit around, right? You got right to work doing a podcast. Do you feel like there was anything there that was sort of driving you to figure out something that was more stable or independent, or was it just the opportunity presented itself the way that it did and you went for it, or some other option?
I was out of a job, you know, for the first time in a while, maybe in my showbiz career up to that point. It was a little unnerving not having a contract, you know. I had twins that were, I don't know, 2 years old or something. And so it was like, it felt a little vulnerable financially. I had the kids, I had a pretty big nut, I had a pretty, you know, comfortable lifestyle, mortgages, and, you know, I had bills. I never really panicked about it. It didn't bother me that much. I don't know why. It's not my wiring to be reactive that way. I just kind of thought, well, you know, it's time to go to work, and you're going to go to work in many different fields now. It's not going to be doing radio every day. It'll be other things. But I always did other things anyway, And I didn't I didn't wring my hands too much about it. I didn't look at it as some opportunity for a new beginning, or I was going to be on the vanguard of some new media thing, or anything. I mean, it's been, it was right around 15 years ago, so it's been a while. I didn't think much about it. I just sort of went to work. I didn't have real succinct thoughts about it.
Because I feel like one of the other things that's really interesting when I think about sort of people who are contrarian is there also seems to be this kind of undercurrent of determination that's, I mean, I can speak for myself, right? When I worked at ABC News in New York, and I was introduced to the people who were going to hire me by Diane Sawyer, right? So I had a great in, but then they had a hiring freeze. And every morning I would wake up in my shitty apartment in Brooklyn, watch Good Morning America, and send them notes, which, by the way, I look back on and just cringe at who did I think I was sending them notes on what I thought was working or wasn't. But I did that for 4 months until I actually got a job there. And I feel like most people wouldn't do that. They would say you're batshit crazy to think that you can just sort of push your way in. But it was that's where I wanted to be. I moved to New York to try to get that job, and I was going to get it. And I think there is something about, and I don't know, I'm working this out for myself. So that's why I kind of want you to just jump in and tell me. But I feel like when you tell the story about going to the boxing gym and they had bags lying around and you were like, I'm a carpenter, I can hang those for you. And the guys, I should let you tell the story, but the guy gives you a job essentially at a lower rate. You work your ass off, you build the second location, all for the opportunity of being able to coach. That's not, again, this is something that I wish more people would instill in themselves or their kids, right? That it's this sense of hard work and opportunity is what really moves you forward. No one's going to just open the door for you. But I feel like there's something about that that also then seems to align very closely with a lot of people with having a sense of voice, right? Or being able to look at something and say, this isn't rational. This is illogical what you're putting forward, and am I the only one who sees this? Why can't we talk about this stuff? Do you have a sense of where your kind of determination? Because that's the same as when you were hired at K-Rock to be the boxing coach and met Jimmy and all of that. Those are really outlier examples of being hell-bent, determined on making something happen for yourself that are hugely positive in the way that they've worked out, I would say, for both of us, right? But I also think they're not common. And what is that? Where does that come from?
Where's the motivation come from?
Yeah, or just this idea of it's not an option, right? I'm going to just keep doing this and I'm going to find different ways of showing that I can work hard or that I'm smart or whatever, right? That I can be useful to you.
Well, some of it is motivated. Some people have very strong self-belief. Some of it's motivated by desperation.
But you said you generally are insecure, right? So is that?
No, I'm not. I'm not insecure.
Okay.
I'm not insecure, and I don't have low self-esteem. I just have no self-esteem, which I think people think is low self-esteem. It's not really. I just don't have self-esteem. It's not one way or the other. It's not something. I don't have pride, and I don't have self-esteem. And you can't offend me, and I don't have any personal space, and I don't have dignity or whatever people are talking about. These people need to be treated with dignity. You don't have to treat me with dignity. I've never asked anyone to do that. I had some desperation in that my life was uncomfortable, and I wanted to try to physically make it comfortable. I wanted air conditioning. I didn't have air conditioning. I wanted a car that was not a truck, that had a stereo and air conditioning. I wanted to be able to go out and eat and not, fret over ordering an app. If I order an appetizer, then you can't have a glass of wine because you can't have them both. It's too expensive. Most of it for me was just a comfort kind of thing. I was on a construction site and it's hot or it's cold, it's whatever it is outside, and doing, earthquake rehab, crawling under buildings, demo. It was hard. It was kind of dirty. And it didn't pay very well. So I was like, well, I'd like to do something else so I could be comfortable. And with a kind of notion of, well, one day you're going to have kids, you're going to have a family, you have to take care of people. You want to own a home. You don't want to just keep, I would rent apartments and have 3 roommates. I was like, it wasn't an enjoyable life. So I had a fair amount of desperation in there. I wasn't a desperate character, but I was just kind of like, well, this is a life that's not that interesting to me.
You wanted a better life.
Yeah, I wanted a better
More
life.
Yeah.
Right. And but I also wanted a better version of my life. It wasn't, I work with a lot of guys who are carpenters, and they were happy to be carpenters. They liked that. They felt good about it, and they liked having a trade and strapping on the tool bags in the morning and cranking up the stereo, and and I got that facet of it too. Like, I was like, well, I like having a skill, and I like having a kind of a field of expertise and knowing how to handle a framing gun or a sheetrock. I liked it, but it wasn't for me. It wasn't. I felt like I was creative, and the guys I work with, they didn't feel creative. They weren't nursing ideas and jokes and books and scripts and stuff in their head. They were going to work, and then having some beers and watching Monday Night Football. And I just went, this wasn't what I wanted. But it wasn't like it was bad. It just wasn't good for me, is the way I was kind of looking at it.
And you knew that comedy was going to, it's funny, right? Like, most people think they're going to be an actor or whatever, and then they kind of get hit over the head with reality and realize, like, no, I should probably be a carpenter. That's a safe, a skill-based thing that I can rely on or whatever. And you kind of did the opposite.
Well, because I don't have self-esteem and I don't have pride, I can objectively look at myself, and I can say, well, what are you good at? What are you not good at? What skills do you possess? What skills don't you possess? And I wasn't pie in the sky thinking I was going to be some leading man when I'm not a leading man. So I was able to kind of realistically assess my abilities. I realistically assessed that I was a funny person. So I understood it. I didn't have to convince myself of it. And I didn't have to ask other people their opinions. I did what I did with COVID. Like, I knew what was going on, and I was like, I know what's going on. I don't need to talk to other people about it. I don't need to stifle myself. So I realistically decided that I had a comedic ability, but I also realistically understood I didn't have experience, I didn't have knowledge, I didn't know anybody in the business, and I certainly did not have any ability to just sort of hop up on stage and slay the crowd for 20 minutes. I didn't have any experience with that. So I was just realistic about what I could do and what I couldn't do. And I was also realistic about how much training and experience and things that I needed to get to the place that I wanted to get to. It wasn't about who sort of thing, or luck, or going down to Schwab's and being discovered by Cecil B. DeMille. I was like, you better start training. You better start training in comedy. But I knew I wasn't a carpenter. When I showed up on a construction site, I was handy, but you're not a carpenter because you have to train. You could be as handy as you want to be, but you would never know the nailing schedule on shear wall. And you won't know what the difference between an 8-penny nail and the 10-penny ring shank.
Right, I have no idea what you're saying.
Right, because you can be as handy as you want to be, but you wouldn't know what a carborundum blade was versus a 60-tooth carbide blade. But as a carpenter, you do know all these things. So I had to learn the skill of being a carpenter, And I knew I had to learn the skill of being a comedian too, that it wasn't being funny was going to be just like being handy. You're just not going to be able to do layout and frame a house because you're handy. You have to know what the layout is. You have to be able to read the blueprints.
Well, you'd had that experience. I mean, that informed, right? That's like prior knowledge. You had this experience of having to learn these skills and these things. And so you applied that same rubric to comedy.
I did. People think comedy's invisible and then carpentry's tangible, but in my mind, they were the same thing. You're just going to have to do this and you're going to have to learn it.
And what was it about comedy that you felt attracted to?
I was like, well, I don't want to move stuff for the rest of my life, which carpenter is just about unloading trucks and hauling stuff around. And I was like, I don't want to do this. And comedy was about me going, well, I like these people. I like this environment. I know I can do it because I'm always the funniest person in the room or the class or the school or the job site. Like I knew I had the ability to do it. I didn't know what it was or where it was going to end up or anything. I suppose a beautiful woman knows she's beautiful. Like they go, oh please, I don't, I'm so awkward in high school. 22-year-old woman who's very beautiful, she'll play it down and she'll whatever it down, but she's got a mirror. She understands what she looks like in her bathing suit, and I was kind of that way with carpentry. Like I'm funny. I understand it. But the beautiful woman is not necessarily going to be a model or an actress, but she knows
the power she has over that, right?
Yeah, and that's not going to guarantee you anything, but you are funny, and this could be translated into something financial.
So was it sort of about like the craft of the joke, right? The craft of the bit or whatever, or was it about audience reaction or attention? Or, I mean, like somebody who says they have no self-esteem, or, which I'm sort of wondering now if that means like a strong sense of self, right? Like I really know who I am.
Yeah, I know what I do and I know what I don't do. There's nothing built in.
And so, when you go into an environment where you're doing something super public, right, and it's really about drawing a reaction, sort of being evocative in that way, is that where the reward comes from? Or is it like you're working in your notepad and you come up with something really fun and that's the sort of hit of happiness that makes you feel like this is what I'm supposed to be doing?
I wanted to get paid. I wasn't really that into the
I'm
artistry
over-intellectualizing
of it. I think maybe you might be. People do that. But I wanted to get paid to do something other than work on someone's house. And that was about as far as I took it. And so I never had a real firm path. Like I did a lot of TV. I never liked doing TV. I didn't like putting on makeup and wardrobe and, sort of hitting your mark and stuff like that.
Well, pretending to be somebody else isn't really your thing, right? Like you're good at
well,
being you.
I was doing TV where I was me for the most part. I just felt it was better to talk into the microphone in a little kind of dark radio station. That's where I preferred to be. I wanted to be in my sweatpants, my flip-flops, and my hoodie, just in a dark room talking to a microphone and reaching people is basically what my goal was. But you end up being on TV. It just kind of comes around that way. And I wasn't against it. I just didn't prefer it.
I mean, I think one of the things that really comes to mind when I think about you and your work and whatever is this sort of notion of like common sense, right? And that what I think makes, I mean, not bulletproof, right? That's overstating it. But it's really hard for people to argue back about something that's super logical. And I think so much of what we are experiencing today is like emotional based reasoning, right? So it's like, I'm offended, so the world needs to change rather than me changing to be less offended at everything. And I think your ability to call bullshit on all of that insulates you because your audience actually, that's what they like you for, right? So somebody else who's been sort of fearful of being canceled is much more vulnerable because they haven't been authentic to who they actually are in some ways. And I'm sort of curious, like, in the evolution of how you think about these things. Even the interview with Gavin Newsom, a lot of people would be in that situation and they'd think, oh, I might want him to come back. Like, I better not really rock the boat. And I mean, I think you sort of seem like you lose your shit to, you know, like it really gets explosive. But it's what a lot of people wanted to be able to do if they ever got a chance to talk to him, and they never will. And so it serves a real purpose. I mean, from like a news perspective, right? You're supposed to ask the questions that your audience wants to ask, but they don't have the access. When you look at things, how can you help to understand the way that you look at them as a logical based thing, sort of removing the emotion, and how powerful that is in terms of judgment and making decisions?
Well, you know, back to carpentry. There are no feelings based, you know, it's like engineering, mechanical engineering, loads, headers, beams, you know what I mean? It's kind of a thing. Like, you know, I guess when I was a carpenter, sometimes I'd be remodeling somebody's house, and, you know, I would say, like, the woman would say, like, I want to blow out this wall, and I want to blow out that wall, and I want to make this into this big, great room, you know? And I'd say, well, this wall's load bearing, so if you're going to blow it out, we got to pick up the load, and that means we're going to have to put a post down. And then they'd go, I don't want a post in the middle of my room. And I'd go, well, okay, then we could span it with a piece of steel, but it's going to be pretty expensive to put a piece of steel up there. And they'd be like, how much is it going to be? And he'd be like, $5,000. And they go, I don't want to spend that much. And I'd go, okay, well, you're either going to get the post or you're going to get the steel. Those are our two options. There's not a third option that involves a pixie or a gypsy or somebody's going to come here and cast a magic spell on your ceiling, Joyce. This is it. This is what we got. So you get to pick, and then we'll either do the post or we'll pick up the load with a piece of steel. But those are your options. And that's all building is. And that's the world I lived in, you know. And so I was so steeped in that world for so long that when I got into comedy or COVID or like whatever it was, I just brought that to the equation. And so I do approach everything from a kind of mechanical, pragmatic, you know, put the mask on in between bites. Like, okay, that doesn't make sense, so I'm not gonna do that.
Or like your Katrina coverage was another one, right? Where, you know, everybody was talking about like everybody getting like raped and murdered. And it was like
I forgot about that.
You did a great bit talking about how that was like obviously pretty racist. That there was this assumptive notion that like all these horrific things were happening that like ended up none of them happened. But before anybody really knew that none of them happened, you were like, this is not right. I'm just confident that the way that this is being reported is not accurate.
Well, most of the stuff, Katrina was like, there's infants being raped on the 50-yard line. I'm like, who's letting this happen? What do you mean? How? No, that's impossible, number one. But yeah, Katrina was super racist because they were saying we got essentially predominantly all these black people in one place, and there's murders and there's rapes, and it's like they're basically talking about them like they're animals. Like, oh, you couldn't take the lions and put them in with the zebras. Like, of course they would demolish the zebras. And I was like, these are people who have been displaced. They went to a place of shelter. I don't see them turning into homicidal maniacs or rapists, but the fact that they're all black and you're saying it makes me think maybe you've set the bar pretty low for the black community. So I just said, this is super racist. And no, people would not just be murdering people. How would it logistically work? Like, I'm going to sneak up to this guy's tent at night and murder him and then go back to my tent. I was living in a house 4 days ago with my family. Like, now this? You know what I mean? And so I didn't need to go to Katrina. I didn't need to see it. I didn't know anything. And it was like, no, none of it happened. A person or two OD'd, which I was like, okay, I get it. Some drug addicts, stressed out. And like one person killed themselves by like jumping from the upper deck or something. And I was like, I don't know how I know all this stuff. I'm not in New Orleans. I know the news lies. I know people are racist. That direction. And I just deemed it nonsense.
Yeah, the other one like that I thought you did a really great job was like comparing the old man who was like beat up outside Planned Parenthood
Mm-hmm.
versus the kid who was like challenging the Native American ritual thing and the disparate like sort of coverage between those two. Where like you just that's what I mean. It's like it's such a logical framework for thinking of like, okay, so like this is getting all this attention. What's the opposite of it? And why is that not getting any attention? What does that say about?
Well, I mean, the news is obviously super biased toward the left, and they don't think they are, or people don't understand that, but they are. It's clear that it's happening. And people also, whether it's COVID or I should say Katrina, see, first off, this stuff just cycles through. You don't even remember it, but like 6 months ago, was this big story about these high schoolers chasing all these dolphins, these like spinner dolphins or bottlenose dolphins or something. They were harassing them by swimming after them and scaring them and corralling them or something. And I was like, no, they're not. This didn't happen. And like, what are you talking about? I saw it on the news. You know, it's on, look, check CNN's webpage. And I'm like, how fast can a 17-year-old swim?
Right.
And the answer is 3 miles an hour. So then how fast can a bottlenose dolphin swim? 40 miles an hour? No, the kids are not scaring the dolphins by swimming after them.
No boats,
forcing
no
them.
like, yeah, right.
No, I was like, this is bullshit. And everyone's like, what are you talking about? It's all over the news. And I'm like, okay, but it didn't happen. And they're like, what do you mean? How do you know it didn't happen? You weren't Maui. I was like, I know it didn't happen because Mark Phelps swims 6 miles an hour. It's like the fastest human on water. I think he swims at like 6 or 7 miles an hour. A dolphin swims 30 miles an hour. So no, it didn't happen. And I don't need to research it, by the way. I got my research. It's right here. Yeah. And I know it. So I'm not going to go along with it. I'm not going to talk about how horrible the kids are. And by the way, you don't care. Nobody cares. You don't care about the stupid dolphins anyway. So why do you even care? Why are you acting like you care?
Well, so it's also that idea of just asking questions, right? Thinking like, okay, someone's feeding me some information as fact. I'm going to push back and think like, what are the facts that we know that can help us sort of like deconstruct this? And I think in the current moment, certainly over the last like 10 years, and again, like for me, I feel like I grew up in a house where my mom taught us like in order to be a good listener, you have to be able to ask good questions. So when you ask questions, what you're doing is you're showing the person that you're listening, and it's respectful, right? You can ask a good question. It means you're part of the conversation. And that extended even to like we would go to like our pediatrician for like our annual visit. And my mom would be like, you have to have 3 questions you're asking the doctor.
Wow.
It instilled this idea in me that like it's really polite. And it's not. Like people actually fucking hate it, right? And I'm like regularly told by female friends that like, you know, you're so aggressive, or like, can we just not talk about like hard issues? And there's a part of me that's like, I don't necessarily disagree, but I want to know why you think the way you do. Because I think the only way we learn is by having these conversations where like you think about something differently than I do. I listen to you. I process the information, I ask you some questions, and we both leave hopefully feeling more informed than we did. And that should be the basis of the friendship.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know why it's difficult or why it feels like an attack or an infringement upon some rights or something.
Yeah, no, I think the contrarian thing often is labeled as a negative, when in fact, I don't think it's negative. I think it's about actually giving a shit. Right? Like if I didn't give a shit, then I wouldn't listen and I wouldn't care. And I'd just act like you're an idiot and I don't agree with you, or we're on the same page and we're both right. It's the process of asking those questions and trying to dive in deeper and understanding from people who don't agree with you. And I think we get to this like sort of zero sum where it's a debate and I win or you win. And it's like that's not how it should be. It should be we both leave, and like you may have convinced me that your ideas or your way of thinking about a whatever policy are right. And that's a win for both of us, right? Like there's no one losing in that situation, right? But we
it depends how attached you are to your ego and being right and being wrong. If you're not so married to that, then it could be a win-win situation. If you look at your ego and your batting average in terms of being correct or incorrect, if that's deeply held and a big part of who you are and too wrapped up in your self-esteem, then it could put you in a pretty vulnerable place. But if you came at it from a perspective of, I'd like to know more, or now I'm aware, or I love a good answer, you know, then it becomes a positive. So it really becomes a matter of how fragile is your self-esteem, how fragile is your self-worth. I think a lot of people are insecure. I am a secure person. Being incorrect about an event or a situation doesn't damage me because I feel, well, I have a skill and I have worth, and it's easier for me, honestly, because, you know, most of the debates of these conversations were sitting in my warehouse and with my cars, you know what I mean? Or in my big expensive house, you know? So it's like, how low am I going to sink?
Well, what about like when you and Jimmy Kimmel are talking, and obviously with the COVID stuff, you disagreed, right? Like, do you have a protective bubble over some people so that you don't like alien or, you know, cause friction in the relationship? I mean, I feel like a lot of people do this where they won't talk about their kids, right? Or there are certain people that are just sort of like off limits. And I through the whole COVID thing, I feel like he was obviously very, very pro-vaccinate, you know, didn't want anybody to be able to get a doctor's appointment if they hadn't been vaccinated, and was really, really into that. And you were on the other side, having recognized really early, like this, you know, maybe kids aren't affected by this, or this is a different thing. Like, how do you handle that kind of situation, like privately or publicly, in the sense of like everybody knows you guys are really good friends?
Yeah, I was actually to dinner with him last night, and I think the way you do it is first you have to understand with a lot of, you know, late night show hosts, they all landed in the exact same spot COVID-wise. Is that a coincidence, or are they trying to get bookings? You know what I mean? Because you start popping off about not wanting to get kids vaxxed. George Clooney's not coming on the next week, and neither is Bryan Cranston. So there's an element in Hollywood where you go, why are all these people the same on everything? Well, they're making business decisions. So you don't totally know how into X, Y, or Z subject these people are, or is it part of, I need bookings, I'm in the system, and the system needs to be fed. I'm not really calling them liars. I'm just saying it's like, it's a business.
But you couldn't do that.
I'm not in the system.
You wouldn't be in the system because you couldn't do it, I would say.
Yeah, or I'm not in the system and I can do it. Like, I don't know which came first, okay. But I'm not in the system. If you're in the system, you have to play by certain rules, whether you agree with them or not. Now, as far as Jimmy, I love Jimmy and Jimmy loves me. And when we get together, we talk about the things that make us love each other, and we laugh a lot, you know. And I have many friends this way because I'm in LA. I'm not going to start talking about Gavin Newsom or COVID or whatever. I'm not convincing them of anything. They're not convincing me of anything. You know, let's eat. Let's have a good time. That's kind of the long and the short of it. It's not a real intricate alchemy. It's just, do you like this person? Yes. Why do you like this person? Because the person is a generous person. It's a funny person. They've done a lot for me. We've had this great relationship. And okay, so now you're going to go out to dinner. Okay, well, let's talk about that. Or let's enjoy ourselves. Not everything has to be a revival.
Yeah, but I think for me, in some ways, I feel like if you really respect each other and these issues are really important, then you kind of do need to talk about them, right? I mean, it sort of feels like if you're avoiding the important stuff in the name of the relationship, is the relationship really that strong? And I'm not trying to say like I'm analyzing your relationship with Jimmy, but just in general, like if there are topics that are off limits between good friends who love each other, is that really to the benefit of the, sort of progress or figuring these things out, that like people are just allowed to stay in their safe space and not be pushed because it's upsetting, or because, I mean, I fully appreciate that people who are, you know, sort of in the system, who know their livelihood and all of their stuff is on the line, if they don't fall in line, are under a different kind of pressure, right? But I would think privately that would almost be the kind of thing that they would want to talk about, right? They'd want to say, like, you know what, this sucks. Like, I don't think kids should be vaccinated, but I gotta do this. It's bothering me.
I'm not accusing Jimmy of that. I mean, I think he believes what he says, and just like I believe what I say and you believe what you say. Well, part of it for me is I've had no success talking anyone out of anything ever. I've pretty much figured out that people sort of think what they think, and they like what they like on their pizza. And I'm the only person I know who's not a huge pepperoni fan, but they like it. And I'd rather get the sausage and onion, which I would argue is a much better pizza topping, but they want the pepperoni. And I'm not talking them out of it. And I've never really been able to talk anyone out of anything, for the most part. Now, the guys like Dr. Drew, we have a lot of talks about kind of back and forth, and I go, oh, I never thought of it that way. But generally, sort of talking people out of COVID or pizza toppings.
But you see, that's sort of what I mean. It's
really
like, it's not talking somebody out of it. It's
well,
not the zero sum. It's not the win. Like, I win, they lose. It's the, tell me why you're taking this position. I really respect you. I want to know how you've come to this conclusion, right? And why am I coming to such a different conclusion? Like, do you have information I don't have, right?
They would just give you a long list of why they arrived at the conclusion they arrived at. And then you would give them a list of reasons why.
This is the problem, right? Isn't it?
Arrived. Well, the problem is, yes, it is. Or it's part of the problem. I guess depending on where you're at. I mean, to me, it's the problem. I don't know. To Gavin Newsom, is it the problem? You know what I mean?
Well, no.
It's
I think if you're in a
Newsom.
position of power and you're not open to listening to other people, like, that's a privilege you have, theoretically, right? I don't think it's necessarily long-term a good strategy.
Right.
But I see why you want to, I mean, it's sort of like this idea of, like, nobody silences accurate information. There's never censorship of accurate information, right? If the information's wrong, the market or the audience or whatever will correct it.
Right.
There's no need to censor it, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with that, yeah. Well, there's probably a few angles here. One is what is your goal for this dinner or this encounter? And my goal for most encounters and all dinners is I'd like to enjoy my dinner. So there's a kind of a narcissistic, selfish aspect to, like, I want to go enjoy dinner. You know what I mean? And I don't want to debate or argue, depending on what it turns into. But I don't really want to do that with anything. Like, it doesn't have to be COVID. It could be anything. I would like to enjoy this dinner as much as I can enjoy this dinner. Now, maybe that's some lack of fiduciary duty or something on my part, or maybe it's selfish. But I feel like I said my piece, they've said their piece, and now we're going to eat. And I do believe you have a responsibility to say your piece in the sort of macro. I'm not as consistent about it in the micro. Like, I believe there's a way to raise kids that's healthy and that creates good citizens. I don't do a ton of it with my kids. I'm a little lazy about it with my kids, you know? So I don't practice everything that I preach. I'm not that virtuous, you know? And sometimes, and more often than not, I just, there's nobody I go out to dinner with that I don't have some beef or disagreement or past something. If I go out to dinner with my sister, I got thoughts. And so do you, and so does everyone else. Now, do you want to rehash those thoughts, or do you want to have a laugh?
No, but I guess this is like part of what I'm struggling with, right? Is this idea of like, if we have some emotional, past history where I hurt your feelings and, we're both over it or whatever, like we don't need to talk about it anymore. But if it's something that's an issue about like freedom of speech or giving up freedom of assembly, right? Those are issues that I feel like, and maybe this is why I don't have very many friends, right? That like, I can't shut up. I can't be like, hey guys, like, let's just talk about pepperoni on our pizza. I'm like, what the fuck are you guys thinking? You know what I mean? Not that aggressively, because I'm toned it down a little bit, but like the notion that like, we're all gonna just sit back and, enjoy our margaritas and not talk about these inalienable rights that we're giving up without any conversation. That scares me.
Yeah, and I agree. And it, like I said, like Neil deGrasse Tyson comes on the show and he starts talking about stuff I disagree with, and I push back a little bit, but I don't, get into a Donnybrook with him, because there's some sort of balance, of like, look, I like him as a person. I don't think he's a bad person. I think he's wrong about a few things. I'm also running a business. I want it to be a hospitable place for people to come on and share their opinions. It was like Neil deGrasse Tyson on a Tuesday and Rob Reiner on a Thursday, and I was like, Rob Reiner's going to come on. And I disagree with many things, Rob Reiner, vis-a-vis COVID and civil liberties and all that kind of stuff. But he's on to talk about a documentary that he made about the Kennedy assassination. And I find that interesting. And I agree with him on many of the things that he's uncovered. So we talk about that, you know what I mean? And we have a nice conversation. And I disagree with him on many other subjects. But at a certain point, do you want him to ever come back on the show? Do you want Neil deGrasse Tyson to ever come back on the show? That's a kind of the business decision part of it. I will push back if Gavin Newsom's going to come in and start saying insane things. But on the other hand, I want Bryan Cranston to come back on the show. I like Bryan Cranston. We're very different politically, but there's value in him coming on the show. And in the last week, I spent time with Bryan Cranston. I spent time with Jimmy Kimmel. I spent time with Neil deGrasse Tyson. I spent time with Rob Reiner. Okay, not my cup of tea politically, but they're all smart and they're all good people. And at the end of the day, I would like to have a conversation with them, even if it's at the risk of not delving into certain subjects that people could deem more important, or that you would deem more important.
Well, and I'm not trying to sit on some sort of like moral high horse, because that's not what I mean at all. And I think you obviously, the reason I'm talking to you is because you do this you do challenge people all the time, and you are like a logical voice in the sort of void of, rationality that we're going through. So I don't mean to be like hard on you about it at all, but just was curious, like, how does it play out, right? Like in the rest of your life, how is it something that, you kind of like pick and choose where to do that? And I think obviously you want to go out and have fun, and it doesn't have to be always so heavy. And for the variety of the show, you don't want to be talking about freedom of assembly every show, right? So, I mean, I completely understand that. And I really appreciate you sort of helping me think some of these things through too, because I think it is confusing. It's a lot to feel like you're carrying this sense of responsibility, right, in a way, for like, what are we doing? Like, where is everybody? And then also, navigating your normal life and not alienating people or trying to be hostile or aggressive in some way, right? And I think that's part of the reason that I think comedy is so important, right? Because I think comedy is a magical recipe that lets people talk about really hard things that would otherwise be so divisive, nobody could talk about them. Mm-hmm. And so Anyway, I've kept you longer than I promised I would, but thank you so much. Is there anything else that you feel like we should talk about?
With some advance notice, I probably could have come up with something, but I just like having a conversation.
Yeah, me too. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you.
My pleasure.